Intermittent fasting has been growing in popularity in recent times, not only as merely a way to lose weight, but for overall general health of the body and mind. Dr. Jason Fung, a nephrologist who authored the books The Obesity Code and The Complete Guide to Fasting, is one of the most vocal advocates of intermittent fasting, having seen its astonishing effects in his type 2 diabetes patients. Let's listen to Dr. Jason Fung.
The thing is that the fasting came out of sort of an understanding of what causes the obesity. And then I thought, well, low carbohydrate diets, they're great, but a lot of people just didn't follow them. So then what else could I do? And that was where I started to think about fasting and then thought, oh, what a bad idea this is. I had the same exact reaction as everybody does. And then I thought, but really, what's so bad about it? Because everything's about context. That is to say, if you have a 19-year-old girl who weighs 40 pounds and has anorexia nervosa, yeah, fasting is bad for you. But if you have a 65-year-old man with type 2 diabetes on 200 units of insulin weighing 400 pounds, hey, wait, fasting might be good for you. So the fasting's the same, but it's all a matter of where you apply it. And this is what always is important in medicine. You don't use the same treatments for the same patients. If somebody has hyperthyroidism, you don't give them more thyroid. But if they have low thyroid, you give them thyroid. It's good. So this is the thing that is important. And everybody says, oh, you're going to cause anorexia. It's like, okay, that 65-year-old man who weighs 400 pounds is not at particular risk of anorexia. Okay. So let's be clear. Yes, you're not going to do it in a 16-year-old girl who has image problems. That's asking for trouble. But you are going to do it in that 65-year-old because you just might save their life. So it's all about context, about where you apply these issues. And that's the thing that's more important than anything else. And absolutely, the doctors around my area at first thought it was crazy. I got all kinds of like, oh, man, this guy's crazy. But then what happened, of course, is that patients started to get a lot better. So some of these patients, they'd come in. In fact, I saw somebody just this morning. So they're on 120 units of long-acting insulin, 40 units TID 3 times a day for short-acting. So 240 units of insulin a day. And then we started her fasting, and today I saw her. She's on 0 units of insulin.
Wow.
She's on no oral hypoglycemics, and her sugars are running between 4 and 6. It's like, okay, this is the power of what happens when you let your body simply burn off all that sugar instead of using glucose to sort of bundle it all up. And
Right.
this is so we'd have cases like this, and they'd go to their family doctors, and their family doctors would be sort of stunned at first, and then they'd see a second patient and a third patient who'd had the same thing, and they're all like, oh, okay, well, there's something here. Let me send you my other patients.
Right.
So then we started seeing a lot of, and so we in our area, people have seen sort of firsthand the results, and we have tons of doctors who have themselves have lost weight. So they're like, oh man, I know this is right because I've seen it firsthand, and nothing's more powerful to them than themselves losing 30, 40, 50 pounds. So now, of course, the sort of evidence is there. I mean, the evidence in terms of randomized trial, of course, is not there. There's very little research. But the personal sort of evidence that the doctors need to sort of base their decisions, they know it. They've seen it with their own eyes. They've done it themselves in a lot of cases. And so there's a lot less pushback. And that's where we created the IDM program. So that's the Intensive Dietary Management Program, because there's very little resources for people who are fasting. And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, The Complete Guide to Fasting, was to give people some information that's out there. And it's all available on my blog as well. If you search on the archives, all the information is all there as well. You can get it for free. It's just in a nice book if you want to do that. Yeah, so then that's what we did. We created this, we wrote the book, and we created the Intensive Dietary Management Program for people who sort of wanted to be guided along this path. Because the truth is that there's a lot of people who need the guidance. In days past, you could ask your mom about fasting and she'd help you, but now nobody does it anymore, so it's very difficult. There are problems that come up during fasting, for sure. There's headaches, there's constipations, there are cramps. There's hunger, how to deal with the hunger, and all these sort of issues that it's easier if somebody is there to help you. So
Sure.
we created the IDM program, which has basically a coaching package. So somebody is there who has experience with fasting, and you're in a group of people who will support you. So this is the sort of idea of peer support, which is a very powerful idea that people don't usually acknowledge. That is, when you're doing something, it's actually a lot easier when you do it in a group. And that's the whole basis of Weight Watchers. Like Weight Watchers, the diet changes all the time. And it's not a bad diet. I actually think it's pretty reasonable. But it's changed from the 1970s to today. The diet has changed because they try to keep up with the science. But what hasn't changed is that they're in a group where people provide support for each other. And that's probably as important as anything else. In school, we recognize the importance of this. We call it peer pressure because there's this pressure to conform. Here, it's basically peer support. So you are in a group of people who are all trying to do the same thing and all willing to support each other, because that support that you get is a different support than an authority figure like myself telling them what to do. And it's the same. The teacher telling the students is different from the students telling the students, and which is more powerful. Peer pressure is more powerful. So therefore, we have to use that to our advantage and create this sort of mutually supportive network, which is what we try to do at the IDM program. So there's coaching sessions, and we also have this sort of community membership where people do group fast together and so on. So some people always ask, should you do research and all this? I'm like, God, if you were going to change people's opinion, it would take like a decade to do it through research. That is, you'd have to get all the kind of case reports, then you'd have to do the retrospective case studies, then you'd have to go and do a randomized controlled trial, all of which costs like a couple $1 million
Right.
and like 3 years. And then it comes out and people will ignore it because if it doesn't fit their sort of worldview of things, like the Women's Health Initiative, that was a sort of a key study in the early 2000s, which showed the low-fat diet was completely useless
But
for
totally
everything.
ignored. But
And
totally
it
ignored.
totally ignored. So that was 2006. And you probably remember this. It was like the low-fat diet didn't cure heart disease. It did nothing for heart disease. And of course, we still kept recommending the low-fat diet for like a decade afterward. It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
You just spent like $50 million proving that this diet didn't work, and we still kept recommending it. So I was like, okay, if you want to change people's attitudes through research, it's going to take you a long time. And truthfully, I'm a clinician. I treat people, and that's what I do. So I want to get the information out to the people. You just send it out. Let people take it as they will.
Yeah.
And if people listen to you, great. Those people that don't want to listen to you, well, don't listen to me. It doesn't matter. If you don't listen to me, well, I can't help you. If you do listen to the, then maybe you'll have a chance that you'll be helped. And that's the.
And the question keeps coming up, well, how long do I need to fast for it to be worthwhile? Is a 18-hour fast any different than a 20-hour fast? So where do you, I know this is kind of broad, but how do you draw the line of the length of fast for people for what their goal may be?
I don't think there is any line, because the whole thing is really a spectrum. So again, if you go back to the 1950s, United States, for example, people are eating 3 meals a day. There's no, they're eating white bread, they're eating jam, they're eating Oreo cookies. The main difference, I think, is that they're just not eating all the time. They're not snacking constantly. They're eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner as breakfast, lunch, and dinner at a proper table. They're not eating at their computer desk. I mean, that was unheard of, honestly, before 10 years ago. And there's no eating in your car. I mean, the drive-through kind of changed that a little bit. So again, that's sort of 10, 15, 20 years old, eating in the movie theaters, even. So all those sort of snacking opportunities, all those types of thing where you're just kind of eating all the time. So if you go back again to the 50s, you don't go into the hospital and find like 10 different fast food chains in the lobby of your hospital. There was a cafeteria, and they closed in between breakfast and lunch, and they closed between lunch and dinner. You couldn't find anything to eat. There was no coffee shop. There's no Dunkin' Donuts. There's no Tim Hortons. It wasn't that difficult because it just wasn't there. So if you didn't see the coffee shop, if it was closed, hey, guess what? You didn't eat because there was nothing to eat. So you just went ahead and did your work. So that's sort of the idea is that you can do this sort of 3 meals a day, this 12-hour fast at nighttime. And what you're doing is you're really sort of balancing your feeding times with your fasting time. So when you feed, you're going to store food energy. When you fast, that 12 hours, you're going to use up some of that excess food energy that you took in during the day. And guess what? Your body actually does a great job of naturally balancing itself. I mean, this whole idea that you need to count your calories is ridiculous, because the sort of average 1 or 2 pounds of weight gain a year that we see in people, I mean, that's a level of precision that is just impossible if you are trying to count your calories, which is very inaccurate, and balance that with your energy expenditure, which you have no idea how many calories you're balancing. So how does that work? In the 50s, everybody did it naturally. So therefore, they're very powerful balancing mechanisms. But what we've done is we've overcome that by several ways. One is eating all the time. Two is eating very processed food. So instead of eating sort of natural kind of whole foods that are unprocessed, we've gotten into these sort of ultra processed foods that we have, and a lot of excess sugar as well, because sugar is cheap. And one of the things that changed was the availability of high fructose corn syrup, which is not a whole lot different than sugar, but cheap. So it was so cheap that people could put it everywhere and not even notice the difference, but it made food taste really good. So that was a big difference. So the fructose intake went way up, and of course, along with that, a lot of obesity and so on. So at 12 hours, it's sort of a balance. You're balanced between feeding and fasting. And as you go longer and longer, you simply kind of shift that balance. But there's no kind of magic line where you cross over. You could go 8, you could do very well on 16 hours. You could do very well on 12 hours. You could do very well on 24 hours. As you go longer, of course, then it's a little bit more powerful, but then you start dealing with the hunger pangs and all this sort of stuff that go along, sometimes the constipation. And even as you go out to multiple day fasts, then you start to get into sort of a different dynamic. I mean, hunger starts to peak. It peaks around day 2, and then actually goes down, which is, I think, very interesting, because your body starts to switch over into burning fat. And as you provide the body with the energy it needs from body fat, your hunger actually starts to subside. So by the time eating is more of a sort of a psychological, hey, I would like to eat that, not because I'm hungry, but because that tastes really good and I'm at a social event or whatever. But she's sort of realized that, hey, this is not a physical sort of necessity. It's more of a psychological necessity. And if you're sick, then you can sort of just say, okay, well, I'm going to ignore that because I know that my body is able to provide for me the nutrients it needs, because it's just from food that you've eaten in the past.